um, yeah, but mainly artists in general, theater, cinema, etc.
Politicization of arts and,
yes.
You said?
And the compromise in the responsibility of artists with the current situation.
Nice.
Do you store it online at that way? Okay. Vamos a tomar
E como é que a política influencia isso?
Ok. Eu acho que se calhar a ética na saúde não é um muito focado na discussão, porque a ideia é darmos continuidade aos painéis da manhã. Mais ou menos, ou conhecemos alguns deles. Ok. Então, se não há mais nenhuma sugestão. Okay. I have one topic also, which tem tema também que é relacionado à deslocação da atividade económica, da atividade produtiva para a atividade especulativa. Eu acho que isto é um dos temas que é um dos grandes problemas de hoje em dia, portanto vou pôr este tópico. Basically, we have three topics. We'll go, since there are not many things that are related to, there are not many areas of questions. We'll go by order of questions. So, first topic we'll go is the crisis in Iceland and the difference why such a strong position is not being taken in other parts of the world.
There are one big reason for it. Iceland is independent. It's not a member of the European Union. And to give a little background, many nations has experienced banking troubles and collapses. And what happened? During the Great Depression, it was horrible since also the depositors lost their money. The bank owners lost their money, and the state refused to guarantee for the depositors, so they also lost their money. So you got to run on the banks, like you see these endless queues outside the American banks at that time. Now the state guarantees the depositors' money, but they do more than that. They also guarantee the money of the stupid capitalists, which is very, very wrong. Like Ireland went bankrupt because of that. And they were refused to let their own banks go bankrupt because they were scared and threatened by Frankfurt and the EU Commission. They wanted to force them to bail out the bank owners. So their national debt just went straight to the head. In 1993, I give you an example. In 1993, the three largest banks in Norway collapsed after wild lending and the bursting of a house bubble. Since it was at the end of the Reagan period, as you know, at the Great Liberalization. And the government took over the banks, guaranteed all the deposits, and nilled out the shares, so that all the bank owners lost all their money, and fired all the incompetent managers. Gradually, the positive assets and activa were realized, and the state and taxpayers ended up losing no single krone on the enterprise. Eventually, they ended up with a plus. And later, the banks were partly reprivatized, but the state still has substantial share control. Iceland did exactly the same. They let the three biggest banks collapse and immediately formed three new banks to replace the old ones, and the new took over deposits and healthy outloans. The trash was left in the old ones, so the banking system goes on serving the society in the way it was supposed to do. while Irish authorities have guaranteed all the deposits and loans to the banks, the Icelanders did the opposite. They have stopped serving debts to the foreign banks, like the English and the Dutch banks, and with the quiet approval of the International Monetary Fund. Yeah. If you stand up for what is right, the others has to give in. Both foreigners and natives, native Icelandics, are forbidden to take their money out of Iceland. So they are forced to either let their wealth stay in the banks or find Icelandic projects to invest them in. That's what you get when you have control over your own economy. That's the opposite of the European Union Constitution. The opposite, yes. If Greece or Portugal or whatever had their own currency, like Iceland and Argentina had, they could have inflated themselves partly out of the debt crisis. But Iceland immediately devaluated also. That's part of the story. So the krone just got half their value. So now they could not afford to import ready-made sandwiches from Denmark, for instance. They had to put on the spread themselves.
But how was with the things that have to be imported, like cars, for instance?
They immediately sold all their, four-wheel trucks. They had the Icelandics went completely bananas. They were buying this, what do you call this?
4-wheels, SUVs.
SUVs, yes.
Utility
They
vehicles.
were racing around on the glaciers
Yes.
with them.
This
And
was before, right?
so that-
Before the crisis.
Yeah, before the crisis. So that became an export article for Iceland.
Okay.
They had to sell off all their
Export of vehicles.
SUVs. Yeah, and now it took only England and Holland tried to pressurize, as you might have heard, but the Icelandics, they won the case.
But
And
that's
they
still in court, right?
They made, the won in the court. And also they tried to scare the Icelandic government, like they pressurize every small country, like Greece, like Portugal, like so they pressurize every small country, and they give in. Ireland gave in, even the new radical government, which the old government was deposed by these street demonstrations.
Yeah.
Valikaser Olvås, and they were completely. But the new government, which was the left-green government, it was called Venstre Grønne, it also gave in and agreed to pay a substantial amount. They agreed to pay all the loans of the English and Dutch deficits. But the president, he refused to sign, and then it went out to a referendum, and they lost the referendum by 90%. And then one Icelander said, I will never sign this. I will rather drink cod oil for the rest, bacalao oil for the rest of my life, than give in to these unjust demands. Because that was private banks. The state shall not bail out private banks. And eventually they won in the court case, so Iceland also on that principle.
And Peter, how do you saw the news about this Iceland crisis and the way they came out of it, or whatever, spread like in the news, public news, or magazines across Europe?
I never heard it.
No,
They
this
saw the
is
spread
true
of the
news for
news
ordinary
about it.
people, so we don't hear about it.
It was fairly well documented in the mass media in Belgium about that they were doing things differently in Iceland, but the explanation was it's an island, couldn't do things differently on an island. So it exists as a shining example it's an inconvenient example that floats around. But unfortunately, it didn't really inspire people to do things differently because of that explanation. You know, it's also from the moment we talk about the financial world, things become complex, or seemingly complex, and so there's still like this expert bias, you know, like if the chairman of the national bank comes on television and says like, well, we never saw it coming and we tried to do it to solve this in the best imaginable way. Many people are still inclined to believe that, because if from the moment you accept that they're lying to you in your face, from the moment that you have to accept that fact as a reality, I think that's a really scary reality. Because if that is true, I'm going to expand a little bit more on this. So, because for example, you have this all Snowden revelations. So basically, you have a semi-fascistic state in the United States that is listening in to its own citizens in the world, is bombing people with robots. Okay, so we have that. Then we have this financial meltdown that everybody was saying it was an accident. We didn't know that it was going to happen. Well, there is like many people writing like books like this that it was inevitable that it was going to happen. I myself, I don't even know how it happened, but at some point, I think I was 17 years old, I grabbed some economics book and I only read one chapter about the United States releasing the gold standard and how that was, I cannot explain it, but I remembered that was going to destabilize world finances. So then I see on television this guy from the Belgian Central Bank said like, we didn't know this was possible. Come on, man. And then it's part of my movie. Then Sarkozy, former French president, comes on television and then he says like, okay, we need to change capitalism. Did the world leader just say capitalism on television? You know, that was a word that we were not supposed to use. Because if you use that word, people start to think about it. So